My sister raided my 7-year-old daughter's savings jar and used the money on flashy gifts for her own kids. They deserve it more, she told my daughter. My parents sided with the sister. I didn't make a scene. I did this. 3 hours later, her life started falling apart. My name's Claire Whitman. I'm 35 years old. I'm standing in my parents' backyard during a family barbecue, the heavy summer air thick with sweat and the greasy smoke of grilling burgers. All around me, people are balancing flimsy paper plates piled high with food. My younger sister, Brooke, flashes a brilliant smile for the crowd, handing my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, a neatly wrapped box. Phones are up, cameras clicking, and everyone claps like she's just won an award. But Lily's smile is too stiff, too practiced. When she leans into my side, her whisper lands like a sliver of ice in my ear. She took my savings to buy this. I picture the glass jar on our kitchen shelf, the careful handwritten log in Lily's notebook, and the number flashes in my mind: $1,651.26. The sound of cheering fades into a dull, meaningless static. I don't make a scene. I just look down at my daughter, give her one slow, deliberate nod, and decide right then and there to end the show another way. Before I tell you how a backyard gift show turned into a total family collapse, tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city and country in the comments, subscribe, and switch on notifications for more family revenge stories. My life before that barbecue had a rhythm, a steady, predictable beat that I clung to. Weekday mornings were a familiar dance, coaxing Lily out of bed, packing a lunch, and the school drop-off where she'd give me a quick kiss through the car window before running off to join her friends. My coffee was always in a travel mug, lukewarm by the time I got to my desk at the neighborhood community center. I managed schedules and people there, nothing glamorous, just the quiet work of making sure things keep moving, that the kids' art classes have supplies and the seniors' lunch program runs on time. I'm good at it, the logistics, the planning, it's what I do. Evenings were for my family, dinner with my husband Mark where we'd talk about our days. Homework with Lily at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration over a math problem. And then, the best part of her day, the clinking of coins into her savings jar. It was a big, clear glass jar that sat on the counter, a proud centerpiece in our kitchen. She'd labeled it herself in careful, looping letters. My big plan: every dollar from chores, every birthday check from a grandparent, every quarter found in the couch cushions went in there. She kept a meticulous log in a little spiral notebook, the date and amount recorded with a satisfying finality. That jar was her pride. Meanwhile, my phone would buzz with notifications from the family group chat, a constant stream of photos, party reminders, and updates on Brooke's latest almost. Almost got a big part, almost landed a commercial, almost made a breakthrough. Each almost always seemed to end with a quiet ask directed at me. My life was a balancing act, a spreadsheet in my head with 2 columns. On one side, what our family needed to stay afloat. The mortgage, the groceries, the small emergency fund we tried so hard to build. On the other side, what was needed to keep the peace. And that second column almost always involved the monthly transfer I sent to London to support my sister's dream. I said yes more than I should have, always hoping, foolishly, that the next yes would be the one that finally made her stand on her own 2 feet. This dynamic wasn't new, it was a script we'd been rehearsing since we were kids. Brooke was always praised for her sparks of creativity, her dramatic flair, her ability to light up a room. I was praised for cleanup. When she'd leave a trail of glitter and craft supplies through the house after some grand project, Mom would just smile and say, "She's special, Claire. She just needs a little help to shine." That was my cue to get the dustpan. My dad, Rick, had his own version. His advice was always, be the steady one, it's who you are. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a role I was assigned. Holidays were always staged around Brooke. She'd be center stage, singing a song or telling a dramatic story, and I'd be off to the side, making sure the gravy was warm and everyone had a drink. When she messed up, and she messed up often with unpaid bills or broken promises, the family motto was to pull together and not make it worse for her. The blame was never on her actions, but on the potential for a scene. But if I faltered, if I got a B on a report card or forgot a chore, it was disappointing and so out of character. The lesson was carved into me from a young age. Carry the weight quietly, don't outshine your sister, and never, ever complain. The lesson she learned was far simpler: rules are for other people. If you keep performing, someone else will always be there to pay for the tickets. That's why last year I made the biggest bet of my life on her. I pulled together $40,000 to fund her spot in a prestigious acting program in London. It was supposed to cover everything: tuition, housing, flights, the whole package. To get the money, I had to trim our own savings down to the bone and borrow against the value of our house. It was a simple transaction on paper, but it felt risky, a heavy secret I labeled as temporary whenever Mark and I talked about it. I told myself and him that this was different. A new city, a structured program, a real chance for her to build a career. This, I believed, might finally anchor her in adulthood. I laid out the deal very clearly. I would send monthly transfers to an account I controlled, she would share receipts for major expenses, and we'd have check-ins before any big costs came up. That was the deal I set. The deal she heard, apparently, was that an endless faucet had just been turned on, no questions asked. I kept telling Mark, this is the last month, even when I knew another request was just a day away. I promised him I'd cap it at the original $40,000, but the truth was I was already losing track. Lily only knew that her auntie is in school far away and we're helping. I think I repeated that line to myself too, like a prayer. Just one more push, one more transfer, and then she'll be on her feet. Then it will stop. The pressure to keep that faucet on came from everywhere. It was woven into the fabric of our family. The unspoken code was that kindness meant giving, even when it hurt you. To refuse was to be cold, jealous, or worst of all, not a team player. Mom was the master of the gentle shove. Her calls would always start with a long, weary sigh and a story about how hard Brooke was trying, how close she was to a breakthrough. Then would come the hook: you're the responsible one, Claire. She looks up to you so much. It was designed to make me feel both powerful and guilty. Dad's approach was different. His talks were free of financial details but heavy with moral weight. Just do the right thing, kiddo, he'd say, leaving the definition of right thing entirely up to me, knowing I'd interpret it as give your sister what she wants. Brooke's asks were always dressed up as once-in-a-lifetime chances. There's this amazing workshop I just can't miss, or this is my last chance to audition for this huge director. She knew I hated being the gatekeeper, the person who had to say no and shatter her dreams. So more often than not, I just opened the gate. Underneath it all was a deep, gnawing fear. If I stop, if I say no, I become the villain of their story, the unsupportive sister, the cold-hearted daughter. So I held the line in public, smiled at family gatherings, and bled money and peace of mind in private. The day before the barbecue, the family group chat was already buzzing with excitement. Brooke had posted a series of hints. A picture of colorful shopping bags, a close-up of a perfectly tied ribbon, and a cryptic caption that read, "Can't wait to make some special memories with my favorite people." I scrolled past it, assuming it was all for show, funded by a credit card she'd eventually ask me to help pay off. It was the usual performance. That morning, I'd watched Lily at the kitchen counter, her small head bent over her notebook. She carefully counted the money in her jar one last time before we left. $1,651.26 exactly, she'd announced, writing the final tally and drawing a little smiley face next to it. It was a perfect, tangible result of her patience and hard work. Later that afternoon, we packed up a tray of brownies, grabbed a couple of folding chairs from the garage, and drove over to my parents' house. Their yard is small, but it's always filled with big stories, the air humming with family history. As we pulled up, Mark put a hand on my arm. "Be calm," he said softly. "No rescues today, agreed?" I looked at him and nodded. "Agreed," I said, praying that this time I actually meant it. But as soon as we stepped out of the car, the air already smelled of lighter fluid and rehearsed lines. The spectacle started after we'd all eaten. Brooke gathered the kids in the center of the lawn as if she were a game show host. She lined them up, my nephew Max, who is 9, my niece Zoe, who is 6, and then, at the end of the line, my Lily. All around the yard, phones were lifted, my mom, Diane, already dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Dad was grinning like a proud billboard. Brooke produced the gifts with a flourish. First, a pair of brand-name sneakers for Max, who beamed. Then, a fancy accessory for Zoe's tablet, which she immediately started playing with. And finally, the neat, square box for Lily. Everyone's attention focused on my daughter. I could see her hands shaking slightly as she tore at the wrapping paper. Inside was some kind of tech gadget, a shiny new accessory she'd never once asked for. The applause swelled, a wave of manufactured warmth. Brooke soaked it in, placing a dramatic hand over her heart as if overwhelmed by her own generosity. I clapped once, slowly, my stomach turning to ice. This felt wrong. It was too polished, too loud. That's when Lily leaned into me, her small body trembling. She buried her face in my side and whispered the words that broke the spell. She took my jar. She said I should be a good cousin. The scene froze in my head. The smiling faces, the clicking phones, the perfectly wrapped gifts, it was all a lie, a performance funded by my daughter's hard work. The script I knew my entire life was playing on full volume, and for the first time I was ready to burn the whole thing down. I immediately dropped to my daughter's level, my hands on her small shoulders, trying to shield her from the crowd. "Tell me exactly what happened," I whispered, keeping my voice low and even. Her eyes were fixed on her new, unwanted gift. She told me that Brooke had come over to our house a few days earlier, saying she just needed to borrow a cup of sugar. While I was at work, she'd charmed her way into the kitchen. She'd admired the jar, telling Lily how impressive it was. Then she'd asked to see it, just to count it for fun. That's when the manipulation started. "She said it's for family and you'd say yes anyway," Lily told me, her cheeks turning hot with a shame that wasn't hers to carry. She'd told Lily it was important to share, to be a good cousin, to help make everyone happy. She'd made it sound like a secret, exciting mission they were on together. The number flashed in my mind again, bright and sharp as a neon sign, $1651.26. I pictured Lily's notebook, the neat columns, the smiley face she'd drawn just that morning. I asked a few gentle questions, trying to piece it together. When did she come over? What were her exact words? Did anyone else see her leave with it? Lily just stared at her shoes, nodding at the parts that were true. I felt a cold rage building inside me, but I locked it down. I fixed a calm mask onto my face, kept my breathing steady. My only job in that moment was to make my daughter feel safe, not to cause a scene that would make her feel even more exposed. But in my head, I saw it all: the empty jar, the bare shelf, the theft of her pride. This wasn't going to be fixed with a loud argument across the lawn. This was going to be fixed with a switch. A switch I was going to flip, plunging my sister's world into darkness. That night, long after the barbecue was over and the smell of charcoal had faded from our clothes, I tucked Lily into bed. I smoothed her hair and promised her we would make it right. After she was asleep, I went downstairs to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator. With methodical calm, I logged into the bank account I had set up for Brooke's London expenses. I transferred every single remaining dollar back into our own savings account. The balance in her fund dropped to 0. Next, I opened my email and composed a message to the acting school's finance department. My words were simple and direct: remove me as the financial payer for Brooke Carter effective immediately. Do not bill me for any future charges. I sent it and saved a copy. Then, I wrote to the housing office that managed her apartment. I am not responsible for rent going forward. Please remove me as the financial guarantor for her lease. I sent that one too and saved a copy. I drafted one final message, a text to Brooke. It was short, with no room for argument. Return $1651.26 26 to Lily in cash and apologized directly to her. No shortcuts. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked over to the shelf where Lily's jar used to be, took a photo of the empty space, and then photographed the final entry in her savings notebook. When Mark came downstairs to find me, I told him everything I'd done. He didn't say a word for a long moment. He just sat down across from me and let out a long, slow breath like he'd been holding it for a year. The path forward was suddenly, brutally clear. Protect my child, starve the entitlement, document everything. The faucet was off. The next morning, I started building my case. I didn't know what I would need it for exactly, but I knew I needed a record, a clean, factual timeline that no amount of drama or tears could distort. The first piece of evidence came from a cousin, Vanessa, who had been at the mall a couple of days before the barbecue. She texted me a photo she'd snapped, thinking it was funny. It was Brooke, posing with a mountain of shopping bags from expensive stores. The timestamp on the photo was Saturday afternoon. Then, a few hours later, I was watering the plants on my front porch when my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, stopped to chat. "I saw your sister the other day," she said. "She was leaving your kitchen with that big glass jar your daughter keeps." She was laughing into her phone, seemed like she was having a great time. My blood ran cold, but I just nodded and thanked her. The timeline was getting clearer. Later that week, I was helping Mom clean up after a small dinner and I found a spa day voucher tucked into her purse. "Oh, Brooke got this for your father and me," she said, beaming. "Isn't she the sweetest?" I glanced at the receipt stapled to it. It was a cash payment made on Saturday morning for an amount that was suspiciously close to the first withdrawal I imagined Brooke making from Lily's jar. I started gathering screenshots of Brooke's social media posts from the weekend, the pictures of the gifts, the captions praising her own generosity, the comments from relatives telling her how thoughtful she was. I printed my emails to the school and the housing office and saved the files to a thumb drive. I took clear, well-lit photos of every page in Lily's notebook, making sure the dates were visible. I wrote out a simple timeline on a piece of paper. Lily counts her jar Friday morning. Brooke is seen with shopping bags Saturday afternoon. The barbecue is on Sunday. I put everything into a plain manila folder and wrote on the tab in black marker, "For Lily, for me." That night, Mark sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had shut everything down. He looked tired, but there was a relief in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I wanted you to get here on your own," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm glad you did. I was so tired of fighting this for you." We pulled out our budget binder and went through it line by line, circling the old monthly transfers to London like they were bloodstains on the page. We had to face the damage. The money I'd sent was gone and the loan against our house was still there. We agreed right then on a new set of rules for our household. No more secret bailouts. Any family financial help over $100 would be a joint decision discussed and agreed upon together. And Lily's savings from that day forward was sacred ground, off limits. To help her heal, we came up with a plan. We would match her savings. For every dollar she put into her new, smaller jar, we would add $1 of our own until she had rebuilt what was taken from her. I admitted to him how scared I was, how the thought of becoming the family villain made my stomach clench. He just squeezed my hand. "You're not the villain, Claire," he said. "You're protecting your kid, that's the job." We decided to be honest with Lily in simple terms. We told her that her money would come back not from us but from the person who took it. The cost of my years of enabling settled in my throat like a lump of concrete. I had been choosing a fragile, expensive piece over what was fair and right, and my daughter had paid the price. Brooke arrived the next afternoon. She breezed up to my front door carrying an empty tote bag, a bright, practiced smile plastered on her face as if nothing had happened. I saw her coming through the window and met her on the porch, stepping outside and pulling the door shut behind me. I didn't want Lily to see or hear any of this. "Hey," she said, her tone light and casual, like she was just dropping by for coffee. She didn't get a chance to say anything else. I repeated the words from my text, my voice low and steady. Return $1,651.26 to my daughter in cash and apologize directly to her. She blinked, the smile faltering for a second. Oh, Claire, don't be so dramatic. It was a misunderstanding. She tried to laugh it off. I was just borrowing it. It was a family contribution to a family party. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. You took my child's money without asking her. You will return it and you will say the words to her face. The mask of charm started to crack, replaced by the familiar look of indignation. You're not going to ruin my future over this little thing, are you? It was the old line, the one that had always worked before. The one that positioned her as the fragile dreamer and me as the heartless pragmatist. But I had a new line. Return what you took, I said. No apology, no access to this house, to me, to any of it. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing for a moment, and then she turned and stalked back to her car. The air she left behind was thick with the smell of old roles and expectations going up in smoke. It didn't take long for the reinforcements to be called in. That evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was soft and full of that carefully crafted disappointment she was so good at. Claire, honey, can't you just talk to your sister? She's a mess. She made a mistake. I didn't get emotional. I just stated the facts. She took $1,651.26 from your granddaughter's savings jar, Mom. She needs to put it back. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. Well, we'll help her if you won't, she said, as if that would solve anything. That's your choice, I replied, my voice even. An hour later, Dad called. He tried the moral high ground. Don't kick her when she's down, Claire, you're better than that. This isn't who we raised you to be. I gave him the same answer I gave Mom. She stole from a child, Dad. The right thing is for her to return the money. He started talking about regret and family fallout, his words rumbling like distant thunder, a storm he was trying to scare me with. I cut him off. I'm done funding her, I'm done covering for her, and I'm not discussing it again. I heard Mom in the background, but I didn't wait to hear what she had to say. I said goodbye and hung up. For the first time in my life, I let them be upset with me without feeling a frantic need to rush in and fix it. The gratitude and approval I'd spent 35 years chasing had always been a mirage. I finally stopped walking toward it. The next step was to make my new position clear, not just to my parents and sister, but to everyone. I needed to adjust the family system, and that required putting my boundaries in writing. I opened the family group chat, a digital space that had long been a source of stress, and typed out a simple, unambiguous message. I will no longer be funding any of Brooke's expenses. Please do not ask me. I paused, then added a second line. She took $1,651.26 from Lily's savings. That money must be returned directly to Lily. Then, I muted the chat for 24 hours and set my phone face down on the counter. I felt a surprising wave of relief. At home, I made our new rules tangible. I wrote 3 simple sentences on a sticky note and put it on the inside of our front door where only we could see it. No surprise visits. No money talk at the doorstep. All apologies must go to the person who was harmed. It was a reminder for me as much as anyone else. I went online and ordered a small, fireproof safe. When it arrived, I put it in the hall closet, and Mark and I helped Lily move her new, smaller savings jar inside. It felt a little dramatic, but necessary. I set calendar reminders on my phone to check in with the acting school and the London landlord in a week, just to make sure there had been no attempts to re-add my name to any documents. And finally, I saved copies of everything, the texts, the emails, the photos, to a secure cloud folder that Mark had access to. My body started to learn a new posture, one that didn't involve hunching over to carry someone else's weight. Shoulders back, chin level, hands steady. The first official pushback came, as expected, from London. The acting school's finance office sent me a curt reply. We require a designated payer on file for Miss Carter's tuition. I replied with a single sentence. It will not be me. They sent another email, this one warning of late fees and a potential academic lockout if the account wasn't settled. I replied again, acknowledging that I had received their message but that my position remained unchanged. The housing office was next. They sent a more urgent message requesting a new financial guarantor for the apartment lease as my removal had put the tenancy in jeopardy. I confirmed again that I was permanently removed and would not be returning as a guarantor. I forwarded the entire email thread to Mark and filed it away in my For Lily, For Me folder. I was bracing myself for a storm of angry phone calls, but instead I got a voicemail from a program coordinator at the school. Her voice was smooth and professional, asking if I would reconsider my decision for the sake of continuity in Brooke's artistic development. I didn't call her back. I simply replied to her email with one word, no. With each no I sent, the next one felt easier. It was like I was building a muscle I never knew I had. The fallout started to spread sideways. A few days later, my brother-in-law Ryan cornered me in his driveway when I was dropping off a borrowed folding table. He looked stressed, his face drawn. "Claire, what the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice low. "Brooke is a wreck. She's saying you cut her off over some misunderstanding." I didn't play games, I looked him straight in the eye. "Ryan, there was no misunderstanding. Your wife came to my house while I was at work and took $1,651.26 from my 7-year-old savings jar to fund that barbecue show." I watched his face shift through 3 distinct stages. First, confusion, then a flicker of anger, and finally a deep, sinking shame. He shook his head like he couldn't make the pieces fit. "She wouldn't do that." He asked for proof, and I told him I'd be happy to email him the timeline, the neighbor's account, and the photo from our cousin. He just nodded, his eyes on the ground. He still didn't know about the forged signature on the housing form. That was a piece of information I was holding onto for now. I told him plainly that I had removed myself from all financial responsibility for her London life. His shoulders slumped. "I can't cover London," he said, more to himself than to me. "We don't have that kind of money." The first real crack in their marriage appeared right there on the pavement between us. It was thin, but it was deep. He walked back to his house with his hands shoved in his pockets, moving like a man who just realized one of his walls was missing. As expected, the family group chat exploded. After my message, a few brave cousins tried to defend Brooke. One posted a string of heart emojis, writing, "I'm sure she meant well. She has such a big heart." Another cousin, the same one who'd sent me the photo from the mall, then quietly posted that picture right into the chat. The image of Brooke grinning with her armful of shopping bags landed like a bomb. The thread went silent for a full 10 minutes. Then the justifications started again. I let it all happen, and then I wrote one sentence and one sentence only into the chat. "She took $1,651.26 from my daughter, return it to her." After that, I muted the thread again. My aunt posted a passive-aggressive quote about the importance of forgiveness. Then Mom chimed in with a command, "We're stepping in to handle this. Everyone please stop making this ugly." I didn't reply. Dad sent me a private text that said, "We need to talk on Sunday." I replied immediately, "Not about money." Brooke then sent me a long, rambling message that was a masterpiece of non-apology. It was full of phrases like, "I'm sorry you feel that way, and it was never my intention," but it never once contained the simple words, "I'm sorry I took Lily's money." I read it once, deleted it, and felt nothing. I had stopped trying to translate other people's words into the apologies I hoped to hear. My focus shifted to where it should have been all along, my daughter. The most important repair work wasn't happening on my phone. It was happening in our own home. I sat down with Lily and told her in the clearest words I could find, "You did absolutely nothing wrong. Asking for your money back is not mean. It's fair." We took down the small safe from the closet and counted the few dollars she had left. We got out her notebook and wrote a new goal at the top of a fresh page. Rebuild. We talked about our new matching rule, how for every dollar she saved, we would save one for her too. It made her feel like we were a team. I called her teacher at school, a kind woman named Mrs. Davis, and gave her a brief, edited version of events, just that there had been a difficult family conflict and that Lily might be a little sensitive. I asked her to keep an extra eye on her at pickup time, and she readily agreed. At home, I started teaching Lily a new script. We stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced saying, "I'm not sharing that." "It's mine." We said it in a quiet voice, then a loud voice. She giggled, but I could see her standing a little taller. She stopped asking to bring her favorite toys or any money to her cousin's house. One night, as I was tucking her in, she asked me, "Will she say sorry, Mom?" I looked at her and said, "Yes, she will have to." We started treating her room and her belongings like a small, sovereign country with its own borders that deserved respect. We were building a fortress of safety and trust, brick by brick. By the time the school and the landlord started sending final reminders, there was no more middle ground left to find. The program sent its stern email about unpaid tuition, and the housing office sent another note about needing someone officially responsible for rent if she wanted to keep the place. I had already told them calmly that I was off the hook. I wasn't going to be the person who cleaned up this mess anymore. After that, things narrowed quickly. Brooke's posts on social media got quieter, fewer late-night selfies and fewer inspirational captions about chasing dreams. Her texts turned into little stabs of charm and then blame, like she was trying different keys in a lock she knew I'd closed. Mom and Dad, on the other hand, went the other direction. They started moving money to help Brooke the only way they could think to help, their savings. From snippets of phone calls and a voicemail I overheard through the wall, I learned they pulled out almost $14,000 over a couple months. They told themselves it was temporary, that once Brooke found her footing, she'd pay them back. Watching them do it felt like seeing someone frantically try to plug a leak with a bandage. They were tired, their voices thinner on the phone, but they kept answering Brooke's pleas and writing checks and wiring whatever she asked for. Mark and I watched the pattern with a kind of stunned sadness. It didn't fix anything. It just delayed the inevitable. Ryan pulled back in small ways that made the house feel different when he was around. He started showing up late to family dinners, then not at all. When he did come, he sat in the corner, quiet, scrolling his phone. I could see the strain in him. He'd begun to ask for receipts before agreeing to anything, and he'd started talking about counseling. Arguments had begun behind closed doors. The marriage wasn't exploding in a dramatic scene, it was thinning out like a worn sweater, pull by pull. The kids were caught between grown-ups and didn't know what to say. Max kept asking if his mom was okay. Zoe clung to her tablet more than usual. I tried to keep our home calm and steady for Lily, to be a safe place that didn't change depending on who showed up that week. With options narrowed, the pressure finally focused on one small, dangerous opening, my front porch. Brooke came one afternoon with a white envelope that looked like it belonged to a wedding invitation, and she left the car door hanging behind her like she owned the moment. She put the envelope down on my welcome mat and smiled like she was doing me a favor. "Here," she said, as if that single word fixed everything. My hands hovered over it for a beat before I picked it up. It felt heavier than I expected, thick with folded bills and the smell of someone else's cologne. I opened the flap right there on the porch where the neighbor could see if they glanced over the fence. Inside were a stack of 20s and 5s and a dozen crumpled ones, $400 exactly, not close. $400 thrown at a tenured theft that was more than 4 times that amount. I counted it out loud in a slow, steady voice so there'd be no mistaking the number. She watched me, waiting for the reaction that would let her charm me back into old roles. Instead, I handed the envelope back without flinching. "All of it goes to Lily in her hands, and you say the words to her, no cameras, no notes, no shortcuts." Her face shifted through the usual masks, surprise, indignation, then a practiced, wounded look. "Don't be petty," she said, rolling her eyes as if her moral standing had been insulted. "Money is money, Claire." I squared my shoulders and blocked the doorway without thinking, the same way I'd blocked the phone calls and the email threads. A quiet, immovable line. "This isn't for me," I said. It's not for anyone's convenience or reputation. You give back what you took and then you explain to my daughter why you did it. She shoved the envelope at me like a legal document and tried to step past, but I planted myself in the way she'd always expected me to move. She spun on her heel and left, the screen door slamming a small punctuation point behind her. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a moment, feeling that shift inside me from old reflex to new resolve. She came back the next day. There was none of her usual performance this time, no audience waiting in the yard, no careful lighting. She knocked, and I let her in, but only to the living room where Lily was playing quietly with blocks. I sat on the couch and told Lily to stay where she was. She watched with wide, serious eyes like she understood that something adult and heavy was happening. I put my hand in my lap and looked at Brooke without flinching. "Say it," I told her simply. "Say, I took your money without asking. I'm sorry. Say it exactly." Her lips pressed thin. For a second she tried another trick, mumbled words that curved away from taking responsibility. I cut her off. "Say it to her, not to me," I said. Lily, brave in a way 7-year-olds sometimes are, scooted closer to me and folded her hands in her lap like a small judge waiting for testimony. Brooke took a breath and spoke, and my chest tightened as I heard each syllable. "I took your money without asking. I am sorry." It was clipped, not theatrical, no flourish, no silver lining, just a set of words that belonged to the moment. Then she folded a stack of bills with hands that looked suddenly older and clumsier than before. She counted them slowly, out loud, the way I'd counted that first 400, and the numbers added up. $1,651.26. When she handed the last bill into Lily's small palms, Lily didn't beam like she'd won a prize. She peered down at the money, then up at Brooke, and said in a voice both small and steady, "Don't do that again." There it was, the limit spoken by the person who mattered most. I felt a tense relief, like the pressure had found an outlet and was finally releasing. I didn't hug Brooke. I didn't offer to patch her up. I simply watched my daughter tuck the bills into her notebook and close it, like sealing a book that had finally reached the right ending. After that, I finished what I'd started the night I shut down the transfers. I wrote one final string of emails and sent copies to Mark. To the school I wrote, "Remove me as payer, effective now. Do not contact me about this account." To the housing office I said, "I am not responsible for rent or any tenancy documents in her name." I made it plain in everyday language, no legalese. I called our bank and asked them to add a note to our account saying no one may use my name or signature without my express, in-person authorization. In other words, don't accept any paper or email that claims I agreed to something I did not see and sign myself. I also set up an alert on our credit reporting accounts so I'd be notified if anyone tried to use my information for new credit. It felt like a belt of small locks around everything that could be opened without me knowing. I saved every reply and every automated confirmation in the folder labeled "For Lily, for me." Mark and I agreed on a new rule. If anyone from the family asked for help, we'd answer only by email and only with a clear record. No phone calls where charm could refill the faucet. No backdoor conversations where the old scripts could creep back in. I told Brooke I would not respond to texts unless they included direct evidence of payment to Lily or proof the bills were being handled by her, receipts, bank transfers, something that matched what she said. It was a small, firm machine of boundaries. My phone got quieter. At first it felt cutting, but then it felt like clean air. Each confirmation in my folder was a small, practical victory. It wasn't theatrical revenge. It was the kind of quiet, final closure that left the rest to consequence and time. Mom accused me like it was my crime scene. She stood in my kitchen with her mouth tight, her voice pitched high with that hurt she knows will pull me in. "You humiliated her by making her apologize to a child," she said, as if I'd rehearsed a cruel plan. Dad's call came later, slow and heavy. "They'll never forget this, Claire," he warned, the words rolling out like a prophecy. I could hear the hurt in both of them, hurt for Brooke, hurt for the family they'd built around the idea that problems could always be fixed with a check or a smile. Good, I told Dad, and I meant it. If people remembered that a grown woman took money from a 7-year-old, maybe the story would stop being about who was faithful to which script and start being about responsibility. I told them both the same thing. You can love Brooke and you can help her if you choose, but you can't drag me into funding her mistakes anymore. I said it plainly, like a rule carved into the air. They bristled. Mom called it cruel, Dad called it hard. I answered, I'm steady, there's a difference. I set that line and then I backed away from the roles I'd lived in for 35 years. I stopped going to Sunday dinners where pleas for money and careful conversations about support felt like soft hands pulling at my sleeve. For the first time in a long time, I said no and let the silence sit where my guilt used to live. There were other small cuts I made that felt final. I told them I was taking my name off 2 joint things I'd quietly been covering for them, an extra insurance payment and a subscription service that had become another way they leaned on us. It wasn't about me punishing them. It was about stopping the drip of my money into a system that never asked itself why the same person kept fixing everything. That night I slept for the first time without my jaw clenched. My body relaxed like a pulley loosening after years of strain. The bridge back to the old arrangement had burned, and for the first time I could see the other shore clearly. Then the school sent the lockout notice. It landed in Brooke's inbox like a door slamming. Classes paused until tuition was paid. She forwarded it to me with the subject line, "Help," as if the word could carry guilt and bargaining both. I stared at that subject for a few seconds, felt the old reflex to answer with explanations, with promises, with immediate fixes. Instead, I typed the plain truth, "No, I removed myself as payer months ago. This is between you and the school." She tried the usual gambit, guilt mixed with accusation. "You started this, you can fix it," she wrote, like I'd reignited a fire I'd never touched. I answered with facts, steady and small, the way I'd answered all the messages since the barbecue. "You took from my daughter, you are responsible for your bills." She threatened to tell everyone I sabotaged her career, to paint me as the sister who crushed a dream. I closed my laptop, breathed, and replied one last time, "Tell them I protected my child, I'm comfortable with that." The notice held. The door to London clicked shut in a way that sounded like a small funeral bell. I felt the squeeze in my chest, a mixture of relief and sorrow, because nothing about this was fun. Revenge rarely is, but it was necessary. The landlord's emails followed, sharp and bureaucratic in tone but simple in meaning. "If there's no guarantor, the lease is at risk." Brooke forwarded the message to the family like a hand-cupped plea. Mom and Dad showed up at their own kitchen table and in the small hours began to pull together whatever they could. Mom called me, voice trembling, to say they wanted to help, that they'd co-sign if that's what it took to keep things stable for the kids. I told her, like I had told everyone, only do what you can actually pay. There was a long pause and then the rustle of papers and the soft clink of coins being counted somewhere miles away. They moved money anyway, pulling savings and promising themselves it was temporary. I didn't argue. I sent one text, "Please don't ask me to fix any part of this." I meant it. I didn't want their anger or relief resting on my shoulders anymore. Ryan wouldn't sign. I don't know if it was pride, logic, or a sudden clarity that the risk wasn't worth shouldering alone, but he told Brooke he wouldn't be a guarantor for something built on borrowed money and shaky promises. That quiet refusal was one of the first honest things in weeks. Brooke posted a picture of a key the next day, all caption and no context, pretending stability while the message threads behind the images showed otherwise. By Monday, the landlord had sent what sounded like a final warning. The tone of the email was calm but absolute: provide a new guarantor by Friday or the tenancy could not be secured. The apartment teetered on a small decision, like a seesaw with one side already dropping. I tried not to watch, but every ping on my phone felt like a tiny rock hitting the surface of a pond, spreading rings. A week after the lockout notice, the thing that made it undeniably real landed on my kitchen counter. A housing form with my name scrawled across the signature line, not in my handwriting. In a hurried, wrong way that made my stomach flip, The first feeling was shock, then a slow, cold wash of something like betrayal. I took the paper to Mark and showed him. He ran his thumb along the curve of the letters and said softly, "We need to be careful." We agreed not to shout, not to call the police in a way that would turn this into a spectacle, but to document everything to create a clear record. Careful, measured steps. I photographed the page, time-stamped it, and slid it into my "For Lily, for Me" folder. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor, came over 2 days later with the kind of small talk only neighbors use to pass news. "I saw Brooke the other morning," she said, lowering her voice like it was a secret. "She had a clipboard and was on your porch while you were at work. Looked like she was filling something out." My mouth went dry. All the tiny oddities lined up into a shape I could finally name: forgery. I emailed the landlord and wrote in plain words, "Reject any document with my name unless I signed it in person." No legal threats, no hot accusations. Just a clear instruction to protect me and to make them aware that I would not accept paperwork I hadn't authorized. I also sent the scanned, forged signature to Ryan. He called me 30 minutes later and didn't say much at first. Then, in a voice that had gone flat, he texted, "I'm moving out for now." The crack in their household had widened into a chasm. I didn't threaten anyone with headlines or arrests. I named the act and took away its utility. Forging my name was a choice, one that showed there was not confusion or forgetfulness, there was intent. I told myself, and I told the family when necessary, that this wasn't a misunderstanding to be smoothed over, it was a decision someone made. I put protective steps around our accounts, told the bank to flag anything that smelled like fraud, and kept every copy of every suspicious document. The last excuse evaporated like mist. There was no longer a way to say it was a mistake, an oversight, or a moment of poor judgment. It was a choice, and choices have consequences. After the forged signature showed up and Ryan quietly moved out for a while, something in me shifted. I stopped explaining. Calls piled up and I let them go to voicemail. At first I felt rude, like I was doing something wrong, but the silence was instructive. People started to learn that if I didn't answer, I wasn't going to be talked into old patterns. I typed one short line into the family group chat and left it there. "My sister took $1651.26 from my daughter. That is the center of this story." I didn't add commentary or soften it. I didn't try to translate anyone's feelings into reasons for their choices. I had been doing that my whole life, taking other people's shame and making it mine. Not anymore. I stopped apologizing for my tone, for timing, for anything that felt like a public performance. When Mom called in that wounded, high voice, I let it ring. When Dad sent long, worried texts about family unity, I read them once and then archived them. I declined meetings that weren't about concrete plans. No let's talk feelings dinners where money would be smuggled into guilt. I blocked anyone who tried to drag Lily into adult fights or insult her to defend their pride. Mark noticed the change first. One evening, sitting at our kitchen table with the low lamp on, I told him, "This is who I am now." He looked at me and smiled like he'd been waiting to hear it. "Good," he said. The word felt like a benediction. My house got warmer, my shoulders loosened. My phone went from a hot, buzzing thing to something that only chimed when it had to. The power didn't flip back because people agreed with me. It shifted because I stopped needing them to. The obvious next move from people with old habits was money. Mom and Dad began to tap into their savings in ways that made me ache when I heard about it. Little by little they told me they were sending money, here a wire, there a check. Over the course of a couple months, I could hear the strain in their voices. "This is temporary," Mom would say, voice small. "We can cover a few things until she gets back on her feet," Dad added in that weary, practical way of his. They ended up pulling nearly $14,000 out of accounts they'd been saving in for years. They cut back on dinners out, canceled a weekend trip they'd been planning, and stopped talking about the new shed Dad wanted to build in the backyard. I knew they were doing it out of love and old reflexes, not because it would actually solve anything. Their money kept the pageantry alive a little longer, payments here, emergency bailouts there, but it didn't change the pattern that got them to this point. When Mom asked me, quietly, if I could help a little with a gas card or some small expense, my answer was still no. I told her the truth, I've set a boundary, I'm not the one fixing this. She sounded wounded and I felt it, but I also felt a relief that I no longer rushed to patch every hole. Dad tried to argue the practicality of keeping things smooth, but I was done being the person who smoothed over other people's bad choices. The cash kept flowing from their accounts for a while, and I watched them grow thinner in conversations, their plans reduced to managing crisis after crisis. It was painful in a way I hadn't expected, watching them choose to pour their savings into a problem that might never stop asking. But it was their choice, not mine. The public spin machine kicked into gear fast. Brooke started posting the kinds of vague, angsty stories people use when their life needs sympathy, black and white photos, clipped quotes about being misunderstood, soft music playing under images of empty chairs. She sprinkled in a few staged shots of the kids to remind people of her role as mother. A cousin messaged me privately, "Is any of this true?" She sounded uncomfortable, like she wanted to believe the nicer version of events. I sent her one sentence, the only necessary one. She took $1651.26 from my daughter, return it to her. That quiet line did more than I expected. It made other people stop and think. The rumor mill slowed when the number showed up in plain words. Still, there were attempts at a both sides story. Someone posted that family matters are messy and maybe no one is entirely blameless. I replied once with receipts and dates. Then I stepped back. I didn't argue about nuances online. Fighting in comment threads felt like feeding a fire I didn't want to rekindle. Mark, who'd watched the slow erosion of our nights for years, deleted his social apps for a month. The house felt calmer. We stopped looking at what other people were saying and did small, real things instead. We baked cookies with Lily and taught her to count the change she put into her jar. We didn't read the posts aloud in the house. "We don't need that noise," I told her, and she nodded like she understood. There was a practical side to all of this that helped keep our home steady. With the monthly transfers stopped, our budget finally had room to breathe. We started rebuilding our small emergency fund, slow and steady, one paycheck at a time. We changed how we spent weekends, library trips, parks, old board games instead of expensive outings, and it felt like we were learning a new way to live without the constant background anxiety of someone else's bills. I checked our accounts more often and set little alerts so I'd be notified if anything unusual happened. We stored important papers in a fireproof box and scanned everything to the cloud so Mark and I both had copies we could reach at any time. I taught Lily that a code word mattered. If anyone asked her for money or tried to take something without asking, she could say the word and we would come get her. It made her feel like she had a real safety line. We put 3 house rules on the fridge where everyone could see them. Ask before borrowing, tell the truth the first time, and fix what you break. Sometimes Mark and I would read them together and laugh at how short and obvious they sounded, but they held weight. We practiced apologies out loud at dinner, full sentences that meant something. "I did this, it hurt you, I'm sorry, here's how I'll make it right." Lily added her own rule. "No surprises with money." She wrote it in careful block letters and taped it to the inside of her closet door. We also created a small yes jar for little treats so she could see how saving worked without feeling like every penny was under threat. These small rules and routines were like stitches after surgery. They kept us from reopening old wounds. I could feel the old leaks closing up. Our home, for the first time in a long while, felt like a place where nothing important was hidden. We had a monthly check-in that was short and practical, bills, plans, and how we were feeling about the boundaries we'd set. We weren't perfect, but we were consistent. The quiet moments, reading with Lily on the couch, washing dishes together, Mark teaching her to tie her shoes, started to mean more than any staged family photo or performance. My chest unclenched in little ways. There was still fallout everywhere, strained calls, awkward dinners, and the knowledge that some relationships might never get back to how they'd been. but at home with my family we were building a steady rhythm. The old script where I fixed the holes and everyone applauded the show had finally been closed. We put the rules on the fridge in big black marker so there was no mistaking them. Ask before borrowing, tell the truth the first time. Fix what you break. It felt oddly powerful to see those words every morning when I poured coffee. Mark and I practiced the apologies. We wanted our home to have full sentences, no half measures. I did exit hurt you, I'm sorry. Here's how I'll make it right. We said them out loud until they felt less like scripts and more like tools. Lily added her own rule in careful block letters, no surprises with money. She taped it inside her closet where she could see it when she picked out clothes. We made a yes jar for small, joyful things, ice cream, a cheap craft set, a movie night treat. Watching her drop $1 in and knowing we'd match it made saving feel like a team effort, not a vulnerable gamble. The safe and the scanned documents lived in the hall closet and the cloud. It was practical, but it also made me breathe easier. I could sleep without imagining some shadowy transaction in the night. We set a short monthly check-in. The first few felt awkward, listing bills, checking our small emergency fund, asking if anyone had felt tempted to loosen a boundary. But the routine anchored us. When Mark and I sat down, we talked like partners, not secret keepers. We talked about feelings, yes, but mostly about what we would do if someone asked us for money again. We rehearsed our lines so we wouldn't flinch. I'd realized that steadiness looked small when you were living it, consistent, boring being a good thing for a change. Neighbors noticed the change, too. Mrs. Gable said our porch looked calmer, like a house that had stopped holding its breath. Lily's shoulders relaxed in little ways I hadn't seen since she was tiny, curl up on the couch with a book instead of constantly checking my phone for updates. That was the real repair, simple, steady days where no important thing was hidden. The old pattern, me fixing them performing gratitude, was gone, and in its place we had quiet, private safety. When Ryan moved out, it didn't rupture the neighborhood with shouting or spectacle. It was a slow, practical unraveling. He took a small couch bed from a short-term rental and a coffee maker that still smelled faintly of his old kitchen. He told me he needed to clear his head and that he'd been seeing a counselor. He said it like a man making a hard, honest decision. There was anger under the politeness. His voice hardened when he mentioned the forged signature, the betrayal of seeing my name pretending to have agreed to something I never saw. He told me quietly that he'd asked Brooke for explanations and gotten evasion and charm, and that the evasions had finally worn thin. Custody conversations began with practical plans. Set days, public pickup spots, school drop-off schedules. We drafted a simple calendar for Max and Zoe, Tuesday dinners here, alternating Saturdays, pickups at the library so no one felt surprised. Ryan's anger at the betrayal was matched by a fierce protectiveness. At one point he apologized to me, short, awkward, and real, for not seeing the signs sooner. I told him, just protect your kids now. He listened. He started asking for receipts before covering expenses, the way a man who had been burned learns to check the lighter before he leans over the stove. Their marriage didn't blow up in a single violent scene. It thinned out day by day until what was left couldn't hold the weight. It was quieter and somehow worse, two people learning distance in a house that still smelled like their old life. I felt sad for the kids, for the slow dissolution of a family unit, but I didn't let that sadness pull me back into the role of fixer. My job was different now, steady and small and made for a child who needed boundaries more than theater. The kids were the parts of this I worried about most. Max had a question one afternoon that hit me like a stone. Why is mommy crying? He was 9 and he wanted a grown-up answer that made sense. Zoe began acting out at school, tantrums and a teacher's note asking for a meeting. They were signs of the small, quiet wreckage that adults like to hide, so we did something simple. We hosted a movie night and told everyone no adult talk. The 3 kids came, pillows and blankets and popcorn. We put on a cartoon, dimmed the lights, and for 2 hours they were children, not witnesses to adult failures. Lily told her cousins, plain and low, that she'd gotten her money back. There was no gloating, just relief. I watched the exchange and felt something settle. The kids drew a picture that week, a house with 3 hearts and a safe inside. I taped it on our fridge next to our rule list. I told them as we tucked them in that night, "You don't have to fix grown-ups." It was a sentence I wished someone had said to me when I was young. They needed permission to be kids, not mediators of adult drama. We kept adult conversations out of earshot, and when there were meetings about school or custody, we asked that the kids be left out until a plan was set. When the acting school finally sent the final notice, it felt like watching a very slow curtain fall. The email said the spot would be released without payment. That was the blunt truth of it. Brooke forwarded the message to the family with a subject line that read like a plea. She tried to spin it, said she was choosing to leave, that it was the right decision for her, but the dates and the string of unpaid notices said otherwise. I started getting calls from a coordinator who had been polite but firm. She asked if I'd reconsider for the sake of continuity. I replied the same way I had from the start, no. I explained I was removed as payer and that the matter was between Brooke and the school. Mom called the school, voice wavering, trying to make the case that there had been some misunderstanding. The school's policy, she was told gently but firmly, didn't allow for exceptions without cleared payment. Mom came away from that call quiet and stunned. The online posts thinned. The hashtag Brooke used for her London dream faded into silence. She started taking local, small gigs, an afternoon at a community theater reading, a one-off at a coffee shop where she'd recite a monologue for tips. They were honest, small, and underwhelming to someone who'd once promised herself a stage in London. She told people she'd chosen to leave because it sounded better than saying she'd been locked out. When a sympathetic coordinator called me one last time, I sent my standard reply and ended it. I was not returning as payer. There was no glee in that exchange, only the tired math of consequence. Dreams can run on passion for a while, but they need fuel. The fuel had come from hidden jars and borrowed against homes and parental savings. Once the fuel stopped, the flame didn't so much blow out as run out. It was consequence, plain and simple. The silence afterward was not a celebration. It was the quiet result of a choice someone had made, and it landed everywhere on social feeds, in a guest room at mom and dad's, in the weary faces of 2 parents who'd given what they had. I heard through the chain that Brooke was coming back for good weeks before she actually showed up. It spread in those small, careful ways, a message from a cousin, mom humming while she folded sheets, the sound of dad moving boxes into the guest room. Mom called me one evening, voice softer than before. "We're getting the guest room ready," she said, "just until she sorts things out." I thanked her and kept my voice level. I didn't want to give her the map back to my old habits. We had rehearsed for this moment. There would be a last big ask, a simple fix that could undo everything. Mark and I ran through our scripts like athletes warming up, short lines, firm boundaries, no negotiation on the big stuff. We rehearsed how to protect Lily. No unplanned visits, no unsupervised access, communicate about the kids through Ryan. I asked Mom to tell Brooke not to drop by without arranging it through Ryan, and Mom promised with a little sigh that sounded like a string letting go. I put our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, on alert. She already kept an eye on the porch when packages arrived. I told her the code word pickles, so if Lily ever said it on a call or at the door, Mrs. Gable would know to come over right away. It felt strange to set up that kind of guard system, but strange was better than the old churn of surprises and quietly signed checks. There was a small buzz in the neighborhood that day, like the air before a storm. Mom and Dad moved blankets into the guest room and stacked extra pillows by the window. They made lists with quiet hands, grocery stops, laundry cycles, a calendar for Max and Zoe. I told Lily in plain language what might happen. "Some grown-ups are going to be upset for a while. You may see Aunt Brooke, and that's okay, but you don't have to stay if you don't want to." She nodded, solemn and small, accepting the plan like a child given a responsibility she shouldn't have had to carry. Mark and I tightened the last screws in our house rules. No money talk at the doorstep, no surprise guests, and any conversation about the family that involved money had to be through email so we'd have records. It was boring and practical and exactly what we needed. When they came to our door, Brooke with Mom and Dad right behind her, the ask was shaped to land right where I'd always been vulnerable. Brooke held a rental application in her hand like a plea folded into paper. "Just vouch," she said, looking at me like I was some kind of gate. "One call to say I'm good for it." Her voice had that practiced edge, the one that had turned compliments into requests for decades. Mom's eyes were wet. She started before she could stop herself. "If she doesn't get this place, she'll lose time with the kids," she said, fingers worrying a loose thread on her sleeve. Dad leaned in, soft and heavy with his usual practical grief. "You can stop this pain with one call," he said, like there was some small miracle button I could press. They positioned the ask as mercy, threads of guilt and love all knotted together. Brooke stared at me like I was the vault that held her future. I felt the familiar pull: protect the kids, fix the problem, make the noise stop. My heart stung in a way that almost made me reconsider, but my head stayed steady. I thought of Lily counting her jar, of the notebook page with that little smiley face beside the final amount. I thought of the forged signature and the mall photos and the receipts. I remembered the months of quiet erosion in our own home. I looked at Mom and Dad and then at Brooke, and I said, "No, I will not vouch, cosign, or cover. I won't be part of another lie." My voice was small but unshakable. For a beat the world seemed to tilt, waiting for me to crumble. I didn't. They asked for a house meeting the next day, all water glasses and taut faces at the dining table. Mom sat with her hands folded, Dad with his elbows on the table like a man trying to hold himself upright. Mom said I'd changed, and she meant it as an accusation. "You've become so hard, Claire," she said. I agreed, but I didn't let her have the framing. "I stopped funding bad choices," I said. "There's a difference between hard and steady." I laid out 3 simple truths for them like cards on the table. 1, Brooke took from my child. 2, I ended the faucet, that money flow is closed. 3, you are choosing your own limits now. Mom's face crumpled when I said the number out loud, the one I'd written in pencil on Lily's little page. Dad took a long breath and admitted quietly that they'd burned through $14,000 trying to keep things afloat. It was said like a confession. I told them plainly, "You can love her without paying for her lies." I put no policy on their shoulders, I put only clarity. If money came up in that house meeting, I would stand up and leave. The words felt like a lever I could pull when the pressure started to turn again. We didn't shout, we didn't cry. We measured the stakes and marked the line. I could see Mom calculating, thinking about nights out and small luxuries and how quickly savings could evaporate. I could see the weight of Dad's pride, the mix of wanting to help and knowing he'd already given too much. I didn't ask them to stop loving Brooke. I asked them to stop using their love as a funding source for excuses. A day later, Mom tried the old magic words, "Be the bigger person." She said it like a spell that had kept us all calm for years. I looked at her and translated it out loud. "You're asking me to be the person who pays so we don't have to face truth," I said, slow and clear. Dad, weary, tried another angle. "You're punishing her," I answered. "I'm allowing consequences." Then I set Lily's notebook on the table, open to the page where she had written $1,651.26, neat as a coin roll. The little smiley face next to the number looked absurd and perfect. I asked quietly, "Is this the size of the bigger person you want me to be?" The room went very quiet. The number did the work my words couldn't. It was small, precise, and not negotiable. Mom's face fell into a softer, rawer kind of sadness, and Dad stared at the page like it was an X-ray of his choices. I stood up. My voice didn't shake when I said, "I'm done having this conversation." There was no grand exit, no slam of a door. I simply walked back to my car, feeling like a person who had finally put the right key into the right lock. The trap of being bigger had always been a way to make me pay so others wouldn't have to. I'd been bigger for a lifetime, and it had only made the bad pattern fatter. Letting consequences land was not cruelty. It was the only honest thing I could do for my child and, in a strange way, for my family too. I sent the final text like closing a book: "Do not come to my house without an invitation. We won't discuss money. Communicate about the kids through their dad." I hit send and felt a small, steady click inside me, the sound of a machine I'd finally turned off. I muted the family chat for a year and then cleared the old messages from my notifications. I blocked my sister from my front door camera alerts so I wouldn't get that jolt every time she walked by. I set up the school's pickup list so only the adults we'd named could pick Lily up. No surprises, no last-minute switches. I deleted old autopay links tied to Brooke's accounts and put a simple document in a folder I could open whenever I wobbled: the list of lines we'd rehearse if someone tried to pull us back in. The switches I pressed felt small and final: no drama, no announcements, just quiet locks on doors that used to be wide open. It wasn't a dramatic exit. I didn't shout or storm away. I made practical changes and kept them. When I told Mom and Dad, they looked at me as if I'd turned into someone they didn't recognize. That was okay. I'd spent 35 years trying not to be the person who made people uncomfortable. Now I was the person who made sure my daughter woke up safe. I learned to live with the quiet that came after saying no so often you stopped apologizing for it. The trick was to make those quiet choices so ordinary that one day they just became the shape of our life. The first month after the last argument settled like dust. Brooke moved into Mom and Dad's guest room and picked up a job that paid less than her dreams promised but put food on the table. It didn't fix everything. It just made the phone stop ringing with tiny emergencies. Ryan settled into a new routine with the kids: set pickups, clear days for school events, no unexpected drop-ins. Mom and Dad looked tired in a new way, like people who'd been running on fumes and had finally started to walk. They stopped talking about weekend getaways and instead asked Dad about small repairs and what day the plumber could come. It was a different kind of worry, quieter and more real. At home, our dinners became simple again: pasta, salad, a candle when Mark remembered. We started lighting it on Fridays just because it felt like a small ceremony that belonged to us. Lily's jar grew little by little. She grinned when she wrote the new total in her notebook, and we matched her dollar for dollar. I stopped checking my phone at night. For the first time in a long time, I slept straight through. The occasional blame text arrived: sharp, hurtful little things that tried to make me feel guilty. I archived them without reading twice. Our house felt like ours again, like a place where choices were ours to make and not a service station for someone else's demands. That relief was steadying. By month 3, the larger consequences had settled into new rhythms. The acting program was in the rearview mirror. The school's final notice had been the end point. There was no drama, just a blank space where a promise had been. Brooke stopped posting about auditions and started talking about something real she might try to save up for. The tone in her voice when she mentioned London was flat, the kind of flat that comes from a long run of hard, disappointing applause. Mom and Dad had pulled enough from savings to cover a lot of small bills, and the weight of that showed. They moved more slowly through conversation, and their plans were smaller, calmer. I watched them begin to take afternoons for themselves: Dad reading on the porch, Mom taking her knitting, like people learning how not to be first responders to the same fire. Ryan signed a lease and put a little frame of Max's art on the wall in his new place. It made me feel like some pieces could be rebuilt, even if the house they lived in had changed. Mark and I opened a basic savings account in Lily's name at the bank. She walked up to the teller with a 20 and set it down like a proud little mayor depositing taxes. I taught her that no was a complete sentence. She practiced it in the backseat on the way to school like it was a new song. She sounded braver each time. I didn't chase approval anymore. I focused on building trust in our kitchen, the slow, boring kind that keeps a child's chest soft and her nights whole. A few months later, we hosted a small cookout in our own backyard. There were hand-drawn signs for drinks, worn patio chairs that creaked just right, and a cooler half full of lemonade. Lily handed out cookies she'd helped bake, sticky fingers and small laughs everywhere. There were no speeches, no staged reveals, no raised phones to capture a moment that had to be paid for. Mom and Dad stopped by with a salad and careful smiles. Brooke was absent. She was working a job she didn't love and sleeping in the guest room at their house for now. The kids clamored around a small sprinkler, and where the air once smelled like lighter fluid and char, it smelled like cut grass and lemon. I stood in the yard with a glass of lemonade and watched Lily count coins on the back step. The jar sat beside her, ordinary and whole. I looked at Mark and said, "This is what it's supposed to feel like." He nodded and reached for my hand without any big words. For the first time in a long time, I felt right-sized in my life. Not perfect, not triumphant, just steady. The old script where I cleaned up other people's messes had been closed. What remained was simple and small and mine. Keep Lily safe, keep our home honest, let consequences do their work. If this story landed for you, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, city and country, and share your story if you feel like it. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more. If this gave you courage to set a boundary, send it to someone who needs a little nudge to do the same.